question. It's actually a comment on one of my other videos where I talk about how we have the ego and we start out having an ego when we're born because we have it from past lifetimes. So the questioner says, I always heard the other way around. First there's the experience, aliveness, consciousness, and then ego self comes after. Because when you are born, you have no sense of identity yet, until someone puts a name on you, etc. Could someone hone in and elaborate if this is incorrect, please? Well, what is, let's avoid the word incorrect and just say what isn't the full understanding here is that this is based on the worldly psychology, the materialist view that you haven't existed before this lifetime. You are born, and you are born as a blank slate, a tabula rasa as it's called. And there is no personality, there's no nothing. So there are those who say, there are even some non-materialists or non-dualists who say that you're born with this pure state of consciousness. You're just aware, you're just conscious. And then as you are exposed to your parents and later society, then they put this identity on you. And that becomes the ego. So in other words, they are essentially saying you're born without an ego, and then you acquire an ego as you are growing up and exposed to other people and society. So your identity is put upon you by society, by your parents and family. And this is both valid and invalid, in the sense that, of course, when you are born as a child, you are somewhat in an innocent state. And your mind is very open. You know, there are those who say that for the first 6 years of your life, you have the absorbent mind. You're just absorbing everything from your environment, like a sponge. You're taking it all in. And so, of course, during that time, and even later, of course, there is a certain identity that's put on you. Who are you in this particular family environment? Who are you in this particular society? Who are you even as a human being on earth according to your culture and society? And you can see, of course, that if you take people in various parts of the world, it's very different how they were brought up to see themselves. Take a person who lives in a modern democracy and a person who grew up in some kind of dictatorship. Very different how they were brought up to see themselves. And this, you can say this is ego. Of course, it's part of the ego, the outer personality. But what this ignores is reincarnation, the reality of reincarnation. Because even though you have a certain purity of awareness when you're born, you are not a blank slate. So you understand what I'm trying to say here is, when you come into this lifetime, for most people, there's like a veil that hides the specifics of our past lifetime. Because it would be very difficult if you were born with a memory. Some children are actually, but it usually fades in a few years. But it would be very difficult if you were born with a memory that, oh, I had a past lifetime in some other part of the world. Or maybe I had 100 past lifetimes. I mean, how are you going to deal with knowing that much? Especially when you're newborn and you have to adjust to the situation you're in right now. So for practical purposes, to give you the opportunity to adjust to your present situation, the veil is drawn so you don't remember your past lifetimes. But it doesn't mean you don't have something that comes with you from those past lifetimes. Because I've explained that there are 4 levels of the material universe, depending on their vibration, the energy, the vibration of the energy. There's the highest vibration is the identity level, then there's the mental level, the emotional level, and then the physical. So when we died in our past lifetime, that energy field we have, the identity, mental, and emotional bodies, and even some aspect of the body that relates to a physical body, that's a more general aspect of how we relate to a physical body, that's withdrawn from the physical body. and the physical body then disintegrates, whether it's buried, whether it's cremated, whatever. It just disintegrates, and the soul, as it's normally called, moves on. So then you usually spend some time in between embodiments where you are receiving assistance from beings in the emotional mental identity realm, depending on your level of consciousness. And so then you come back into embodiment, integrate with the physical body, but you still have the emotional, mental, and identity bodies that you have created over many past lifetimes, and you carry those with you into this lifetime. And so there is, in those identity, mental, and emotional bodies, there is this structure. You know, I call it, in many of my videos, these subconscious selves. But the subconscious selves together is what forms what we can generally call the ego. So in other words, you are born with an ego, but you don't have any memory of your past lifetimes. So you don't really have any memory of how you created the ego. And most people aren't aware that they have an ego, you know, because we usually don't see the ego from the outside. So, in other words, a child is born with an ego created from past lifetimes. Then it is exposed to whatever it is exposed to in this lifetime, and this, of course, means that the child now creates. We can talk about it in two ways. We can say that the ego that it carries with it adjusts itself to fit into this new environment, or you could say that the child creates a number of subconscious selves in reaction to its upbringing and environment that become part of the ego. I prefer that way, but I mean, you can describe it in different ways. So, so in other words, you are both born with an ego, and you take on an ego in this lifetime. And whatever you do in this lifetime means that you can either reduce the power that the ego has over you, or you can increase the power that the ego has over you. And that will very much have an impact on what happens after your current physical body dies. Where do you go in the emotional, mental, and identity levels? What kind of instructions and healing can you receive? Or will you go into the lower levels of, for example, the emotional realm and get stuck there for some time before you can reincarnate? So there is certainly validity to this idea you find in some spiritual teachings, that what you do in this lifetime can have a great impact on your next lifetime. You can have a better incarnation next time depending on what you do in this lifetime. But the question is focused on this. Basically, you could say the question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, awareness or ego? And in a sense, you could say you go back long enough to when you had your first embodiment, you didn't have an ego. You just had a pure awareness, and then you started creating the ego after you went into duality and separation. I explained that in several videos, how we start out seeing ourselves as connected beings, connecting to our higher self, and then we have a choice to increase that connection, go up towards higher levels of consciousness, or we can go below that starting level, go into the illusion of separation, and that's when we start using the duality consciousness to create all of these separate selves in the subconscious mind. But you can say that so this is one way to define ego, that ego is what makes us selfish, and that's based on duality and separation. So that's the lower aspect of the ego. But there is a higher aspect of ego which is necessary to take on just in order to take embodiment on a dense planet like Earth. But it's not the dualistic separate ego, it's just an ego that allows us to integrate with the physical body. So there are different levels of ego. So you could say that even when you took embodiment for the first time on Earth, you did create this non-dualistic ego that was necessary for you to take embodiment. And then most people have then later experimented with duality and separation and created a dualistic ego. And many spiritual people, of course, have started overcoming that dualistic ego, and you can overcome it completely, so you only have the, one might say, necessary ego left to keep you in a physical body. So again, it's a matter of how you want to say it. Originally, you could say it this way. I've explained that the core of our being is what I call the conscious you, which is as an extension of the spiritual self. And so when a conscious you is sent by the spiritual self, it doesn't have an ego. It's just pure awareness. But in order to take embodiment on a dense planet like Earth, we create this, we might say, the necessary ego. And then most of us have, because of what we've been exposed to on Earth, gone into separation and duality and created the selfish ego. And this, whatever ego we create here on Earth, we carry with us from lifetime to lifetime until we resolve it. And then, of course, you could say there are people who in past lifetimes overcame the selfish ego. So they were born without that ego. And they may take on an ego again, but it's not really likely. If you have overcome it once, you are not likely to respond with duality again. So I know I'm making it more complicated than it needs to be, I realize, but I'm trying to cover all the different ways of twisting this, What was first? The experience, aliveness, consciousness, and then the ego comes after. You see, you can define it in various ways. Ultimately, yes, there was just self-awareness without an ego, but you couldn't take embodiment on a dense planet like Earth with that pure awareness. So, yes, ultimately, in order to ascend from Earth, you need to uncreate the ego that's related to Earth and return to the pure state of consciousness. Then the conscious you can go back into oneness with the I Am Presence. So if you look at it ultimately, first there was awareness, then there was ego. But if you look at it in this particular lifetime, you were born with some kind of ego that may have been reinforced by how you reacted to the environment you were born in.